Welcome to episode 38 of the Just Happy to Be Here podcast. It's me, Tanner, and as always, I'm just happy to be here. Well, kinda. See, here's the thing. Today, for this episode, it's just me. Taylor will be back next week when we talk about Valentine's Day and Valentine's Day candy. I know, riveting stuff. It's the hard-hitting topics that we cover here on the Just Happy to Be Here podcast. But for today, it's just me. It's just me today because I have an exciting announcement to share with you. But before I share that with you, I think it's important that we talk about what happens on February 4th. After all, today is February 4th. I'm recording it on this Thursday. And on February 4th, it is National Girls and Women in Sports Day. It is National Thank a Mail Carrier Day. And it is National Homemade Soup Day. 3 things that are worth celebrating more than just one day of the year. Right? As a sports fan, I am certainly thankful for girls and women in sports. As a small business, I am certainly thankful for mail carriers. That's kind of funny, right? We're celebrating women in sports, and then it's Mail Carrier Day, but it's M-A-I-L, not M-A-L-E. Anyways, why do I think that's interesting? I'm not sure. I'm going to keep rolling. And then it's also National Homemade Soup Day. And I like soup. Soup is great. It's not pizza, but it'll do. Now if Taylor was here, I would ask him what his favorite soup is. And then he would ask me, and then I tell him that I really just want the fresh baguette that comes with the soup, right? Soup's great, but I'm getting pretty excited just about the baguette. All right, enough of that. It's so much better when Taylor's here. He needs to come back soon. Anyways, now for the big announcement. After that, I would say, impeccable introduction. I recently announced that my first book, I'm All Over the Place, a book of poems, prayers, and wonderings, is being re-released with an extended edition. We added another section to the book with 15 extra poems and an epilogue. I know, an epilogue. That's a big word. Well, it's kind of a shorter word, but it's big, right? You don't say it every day, but I've said it like 4 times. Epilogue. Anyways, it's got one. The book has an epilogue. There's this brand new section of my book, I'm All Over the Place, a book of poems, prayers, and wonderings. And when it was first released back in June of 2019, there were about 60 or so already written poems in the book. And there were 3 sections. The first one was Begin. The second one was Wander. The third part was Continue. And then we added a new section for this extended edition titled Look Back. And I spend more time than I would like to admit looking back, replaying relationships and decisions and even celebrations. And as I look back, I see time and time again how God has just been in it all, that he's been throughout all of it. And all of my poems, prayers, and wonderings, and all of my steps forward, back, wrong, and right, and all of the crashes, conversations, and criticisms, and all the moments that I've had my eyes on what is ahead and what is behind. He's been in it all. And if he has been with me this far, I cannot help but believe he will continue to be. So today for this episode, I'd like to share with you 3 poems that are part of the extended edition of the book. Now, you can, and you certainly should, purchase the book at writtentospeak.com. And as a podcast listener, you get 20% off with the code podcast20. So you should do that. And we would have a mail carrier bring it to you. So you would really be celebrating this glorious day of February 4th by purchasing something so that you can also celebrate that mail carrier. Man, marketing is so hard. It's super hard. Anyways, I'm going to share 3 poems with you all today and share just a little bit behind them and about them. The first poem that I'd like to share is titled, I Wish I Would Have Known. And again, it's a new addition to this book. It's one of the first poems that I can remember writing. I wrote it back in 2013, right around the time when I started the creative project, Written to Speak. It's one of the first poems that I ever wrote. A friend asked me to write a letter to my past self, to my former self, and this is the poem that came out. I wrote it while living in St. Louis right out of college. I can still remember sitting at my kitchen table. And I gotta tell you about this apartment that I had in St. Louis. There was nothing special about it. It was 1 bedroom, 1 bath. It had a really tiny kitchen. Had great neighbors. Shout out to Marcus and Vanessa Lane. And the Muther family. It's great. I had some really fantastic neighbors when I lived there. But it was a really weird season of my life. I had just graduated from college, was living alone in a new city, and I really didn't know what was the next right thing for me. And so I started writing. And again, a friend asked me to write a letter to my former self, and instead I wrote this poem called I Wish I Would Have Known. And it goes like this. Pulling back the present, I look to the past. Empty pockets folded open with an overflowing fountain full of coins carrying wishes. A notebook full of what I wish I would have known, but know now. Wrong turns led to the wrong way, which led to a whirlwind of grace, grabbing me and putting me back in place. I wish I would have known it's a relationship. That he isn't a far-off, distant God sitting on a throne cracking a whip. He isn't shaking his head in disgrace or looking for ways to put us to waste, but he's holding out his hand, waiting for our embrace. And I wish I would have known that forgiveness doesn't depend on what I've done, but it's all about the death and resurrection of the righteous one. Not because of the way I behaved, but by grace through faith I'm saved. And I wish I would have grown up reading the Bible differently, understanding it's this beautifully written story by our Creator about our Savior. It isn't just a bunch of words put on paper or this thick book of leather-bound rules found in pews and hotel rooms, but it's a story about the church, the bride, and Jesus, her groom. From creation to the prophets, from the virgin womb to the cross to the open tomb, and each word was handwritten for me and you. And I wish I would have known how to use these eyes, to understand they weren't given to me to lust or despise, but to capture the beauty of God and look for his coming on horizons rise. And I wish I would have known that the acts of these lips and hands are a reflection of whose I am. In them, they hold the power to reveal the love of this one man. And I wish I would have known that beauty can't be found in a mirror, that beauty won't ever be found in a mirror, but beauty is found in who found you, and he has found you. And I wish I would have known about the power of this heart, how it can bend, break, and create. It can chase, shape, and keep pace, but never can it ever be taken away or replaced. And I wish I would have known to search for joy in death, to understand this last breath isn't goodbye, but the first gasp of eternal life. And I wish I would have known about the golden treasure of silence, how it isn't hidden or found in a chest 14 feet deep under an island, but it's resting in the stillness of your tongue, the giant. And I wish I would have known about the comfort found in a closed mouth and the power behind pure presence. And I wish I would have known to dedicate these ears to open heart listening, these feet to barefooted venturing, and these eyes to non-judgmental capturing. And I wish I would have known that relationships aren't a fairy tale. It isn't always Pam and Jim or Jasmine and Aladdin. It's more than a feeling. It's acceptance and forgiveness. It's a commitment to sacrifice to the darkest of times, candle lights and firework-filled nights. And I wish I would have known sooner that we all have a story to tell. Our unique individuality creates chapters and shapes sentences from page 1 to our final farewell. And I wish I would have known earlier the definition of chivalry and Bennett's example. And I wish I would have known earlier the true definition of true love to give the world a sample. And I wish I would have known that it's all about you, Jesus. That this life isn't, wasn't, and hasn't ever been about me, but this life is to be lived for the glory of the risen King. I wish I would have known. But I know now. The other day I was asked if I would change anything that I wrote early on in my career as a writer. And like I said, that poem I wrote 8 years ago. Right now, I'm 31. So 31 minus 8 is a little younger than 25. Math's not my thing. But I didn't really know what I was doing as a writer. I didn't really know what my style of writing was or what I set out to accomplish when I picked up the pen. And that poem really just flowed out of me. I didn't really do too much editing to it, and maybe it shows. But when I was asked if I would change anything that I wrote early on in my career, I certainly would. Like if I were to rewrite that poem now, it would sound really different. There might be a few things that carry over, but for the most part, it would be reworked in almost every single way. But it's what I wrote when I wrote it. And you can't grow if you don't begin. Sure, the poem isn't what I would write today, but it is what I wrote when I wrote it. And it meant something to me then, and it still means something to me now. You have to begin somewhere. All creatives have to begin somewhere. And that's where I started. I will say this, though. I stick by that line about Pam and Jim and Jasmine and Aladdin. I like that. I don't know why, but I like that one. All right. I'm going to move on to the next poem. That's the longest poem that I'm going to share on this podcast. There's a couple of other longer ones that you can find, again, in the extended edition of I'm All Over the Place. But these next two poems are a little bit shorter, and they are also in the book. This next one I'd like to share, it's a poem called No Words. It's a reflection of a prayer, and in many ways, I think it's a prayer itself. Like I said, it is pretty short, so once I begin, it's almost over. It goes like this. No words are needed, for you have heard the silent shouts of my soul, and you still draw close. No fight keeps you far, or curse keeps you cold. No sin or fear moves or leads you away. It's like you see right through the curses and cold and still draw close. And won't you draw me close to see the truth that's washed over me, that's in me, that's with me, and won't you move me and lead me to be? That's it. That's a poem titled No Words. All right. The last one that I'd like to share is a prayer titled Won't You Hear Me? And after I share it, I'll share a little bit about why I wrote that poem and a little bit about what it means to me. All right. This is it. Won't you hear me? Lord, I thought this storm would be over by now, but somehow this storm became a season. Ordinary hasn't returned and uncertainty remains. Won't you hear me as I pray? Won't you once again meet my defeat, meet my fear, meet my shame, meet my anxiety, meet my pain? Meet me early with the rise of each new day. Let not this hope be put to shame. May I remember as I stay in place through all of this, there remains grace upon grace upon grace. Amen. So I wrote that poem titled, Won't You Hear Me, in the early months of COVID. I can remember talking with a few friends right when COVID began. Like, do you remember that? I feel so naive looking back. Because I can remember having a conversation with some of my friends, and we debated buying Orlando Magic masks back in April, right? Like, everybody wants to, showcase their losing sports team right over their closed mouth. And I said something to the effect of, well, I'm sure that the pandemic will be over by May, so we probably don't need to buy them. It would probably just be a waste of money. Well, here we are. It's almost a year later, and we are still struggling through the effects of COVID, and I think we will be for a while, and I think I probably should have just bought the masks back then. But when I wrote the poem, Won't You Hear Me, I really wanted to write about the beautiful reminder of grace, that through all of this, that there is good news, there is a hopeful promise in that, and that promise is the free gift of grace. And that's what I've been trying to hold on to recently. That's what I've been trying to hold on to as I look back, as I look forward, and as I try to be present where I am, that His grace continues and His grace is free for us. And that's the reminder that I need most days. And maybe you need to hear it too, that all of this, throughout all of this, there is grace upon grace upon grace upon grace for us because of Jesus. All right, that's that. Taylor will be back for the next episode. It won't just be me talking. Thank you for hanging out and for staying and listening to me share some poetry. When Taylor comes back, we are going to talk about the things that we Googled. I know I missed doing that today, but it'd be weird if I just told you, hey, I was Googling this, and this is, that would just kind of, I don't want to do that, and I don't want to subject you to that. If you want to tell us what you've Googled, we would love to hear from you. Or if you have a question for the podcast, send it to writtentospeak@gmail.com. I promise you guys, it's not weird to send it in. The more questions that you ask, the more things that we can talk about. And that's really what it's all about. You ask questions, we'll give answers, and I can guarantee you that the answer will probably contain some sort of joke. So essentially, what you are doing in this process is you're asking a question, and in return, we're going to give you a free joke. Now that I've convinced you to send in a question or to share with us what you've Googled, again, that's writtentospeak@gmail.com. I really need Taylor to be here. But when Taylor comes back, we will talk about the things that we Googled again and debate Valentine's Day candy. I know, again, hard-hitting stuff, but we are just happy to be here. And we're just happy that you listen to this podcast. So thank you for joining us for another episode. Joining me. Sorry, Taylor. For joining me for an episode of the Just Happy to Be Here podcast. Again, you can get the extended edition of I'm All Over the Place, a book of poems, prayers, and wonderings at writtentospeak.com. And you can also find it on Amazon. And when you order it from writtentospeak.com, if you want to, I'm not saying you have to, I wouldn't hate it, you can use the code podcast20 to get 20% off of your order. All right. As always, I have talked for way too long. Hey friends, much love. Thanks for joining us, and we will see you back here next week.